Good afternoon, everybody. We're just waiting a second or two for others to filter into the live feed. But we'll start with some preliminary logistics. First of all, for all of you who have tuned into our these many, I guess, 20 webinars in the last 4 months, and tune in primarily to see Marta Blackwell do her wonderful opening. She's not here today, but we are, just for today, she will be back with us. But Jimena Galindo from Global Americans in New York has stepped in to take care of all the engineering duties today. So we thank you very much, Jimena, for stepping in at the last minute to do this. Before we turn it to Luz Maria, just a few other comments I will make. One is we will be taking questions today. I think probably everybody, certainly those who have been watching our events, know how very well acquainted with how the Zoom works for the question and answer function. And so if you have a question, please fill that in. I will do my best to get to them, and I ask Luz Maria as well, time permitting, depending on the flow of the conversation. But we think today, actually, particularly with the one-on-one, lends itself to audience participation, and we really encourage you to come up with your questions. Those of you who have listened before know, and those who are new, welcome to listening to our recorded events. This one will be like all the others. It will be recorded and up on our website at ccacanada.com. We have several other upcoming events which we are about to announce. So please stay tuned and check the website. And if you're not on our mailing list, please, we invite you to do so. The other thing I will mention again before we start is the podcast that Global Americans and Canadian Council does, called Two Gringos with Questions. It's co-hosted with Chris Sabatini, who's a senior fellow at Chatham House, and I am the other co-host. And we're well into our second season, have 35 or some odd episodes. We will drop the next one tonight, which we think will be very, very exciting, and maybe one that's unexpected. It's with Dr. Valerie Steele, who's the director of the Museum of the Fashion Institute of Technology, called The Brainiest Woman in Fashion. And it's a conversation about the role of fashion and culture in dealing with COVID, post-COVID, and the social movements that are gaining more steam, not just in the United States, but throughout the world and in Latin America. So we invite you to listen to that as well. I can't think of any other preliminary comments, and nor do I want to have any, because I want to get right away to Dr. Luz Maria de la Mora, who's Mexican Undersecretary of Foreign Trade in the Mexican Economy Ministry. Has had an illustrious career, and she will start off with several minutes of opening comments. We will then engage in a conversatorio, and as I said earlier, try and do our best to weave in your questions into the conversation. Given everybody's tight time frame, and particularly Luz Maria's, we really are going to try and keep this to the allotted time of 1 hour, and God help me if I don't. So I will do my best, Luz Maria. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
No, thank you so much. It is a great privilege to be here with you today, Ken. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks so much to the Canadian Council for the Americas for hosting this conversation that I think it's not only timely, but I think it will be very useful in terms of promoting this new era in North American integration. I have to say that I really consider July 1st a historic date. Historic date because it picks up on what we were able to accomplish under NAFTA, the agreement that we had in place for more than 26 years. And for us, NAFTA not only was a way of integrating into North American market with the US and Canada. For us, NAFTA was change maker in many senses. But I want to say that in the case of Mexico and Canada, NAFTA really made us discover each other as business partners. Before NAFTA, we were friends. We had great political and diplomatic relations. We had great cultural exchanges, academic exchanges. I myself was benefited from Canadian grants to study in Canada. I myself had the opportunity in the late 1980s to attend graduate school in Ottawa. So we did have a very solid relationship. But NAFTA really made us see each other as partners in trade, as partners in investment, and more importantly, as partners in shared production. So today, when we start USMCA, we're really picking up from a very successful story of shared production and integration. And I think it opens a new era in which we are seeing that we not only have the fundamentals and the foundations for trade and investment in the region to free flowly and also to be able to flourish under this new USMCA. But I think that USMCA also, or CUSMA as you call it in Canada, I should call it the Canadian way, CUSMA.
Thank you very much.
You know, this is the only agreement that has 3 different names according to where you are. In the US, it's USMCA, in Canada, it's CUSMA, and in Mexico, it's TEMEC, okay? So I'm very excited to say that the kind of integration that we will be seeing under this new agreement is not only related to trade and investment, it relates to other policy areas where the 3 of us have decided that we want to also deepen our integration, and it has to do with labor policy, environmental policy, an anti-corruption regime, and very importantly, a set of rules that will help us go into the 21st century economy through digital economy, digital commerce, e-commerce, and all of these new rules that have to do with innovation and with the knowledge-based economy that will hopefully create an integrated North American digital economy regime. So we are really seeing a very important set of rules that will help us remain as key trading partners among each other. So I am very excited that July 1st was the date in which we relaunched or we deepened our integration, which coincided very nicely with Canada Day. So I think that there's a very good prediction over there, having this very nice coincidence in dates. Thank you.
Thank you, Luz Maria. There's so much to talk about. Why don't we start with sort of one of the basic ones, not just NAFTA, but we'll get into the whole investment landscape. But what do you, in your view, are the major improvements in the new NAFTA? And as we all know, 2 of the 3 countries would have been perfectly fine with calling it the new NAFTA. It was everybody adopted their own for other reasons, which we know. But what do you think, particularly? I mean, the relationship between Canada and Mexico, while there's certainly trading going back and forth, it's clearly one more of investment. And perhaps you could talk a little bit more about how, in your view, the new NAFTA helps and aids in the investment between the 2 countries.
Yes, thank you very much, Ken, for this question. USMCA, or CUSMA, I should say, builds upon the already integrated North American manufacturing platform, or I should say, the North America factory that we were able to build over the last 26 years. And this was a result not only of the provisions that allowed the free flow of goods and services, but very importantly, the free flow of investments in sectors such as manufacturing, but also agriculture and services. It is important to bear in mind that this free flow of investments along with free trade has allowed us to build these regional value chains, these production chains that we see are the name of the game in the 21st century. We see intra-industry trade and intra-firm trade taking place. The provisions that we have regarding investment in CUSMA are related to protection of investments in North America in all sectors. We need to also to bring into the story the CPTPP. This is a comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement where Canada and Mexico are both partners too. In this agreement, we have an investment chapter that provides for investor protection, investments protection, but also it provides for a dispute settlement mechanism for Mexico and Canada, and it covers all sorts of investments. Under CUSMA, Chapter 14, which has to do with investment protection, has also an arbitration mechanism, but this only applies between the US and Mexico. The only reason why this takes place is because we did not need, and we did not consider, Canada, Mexico did not consider it necessary to duplicate the mechanism, the arbitration mechanism that we already had in under CPTPP. So that's how they relate to each other. Canada's investment in Mexico is extremely important. We have become, for Mexico, Canada is the third largest source of foreign direct investment, only after the US, which keeps probably some $278 billion. The second place is the European Union, that has invested around $190 billion in Mexico, and the third place is for Canada. Canada's investment in Mexico is close to $41 billion, and this is destined to productive activities, manufacturing, services, mining. Actually, I can say that 40% of Canadian investment in Mexico is located in the mining sector. The reason why these are sectors where Canada invests in Mexico is because Canada has the technology, has the companies, and has the lead. And we obviously are benefiting from those investments made in Mexico. Canada is a top investor, not only in mining, but also in financial services. Canada is a top participator in all of the financial services sector, banking, retail, etc. Canadian investment also participates in real estate and rental services, commercial trade, as manufacturing industry. There are a number of top Canadian companies that have been in Mexico for decades. And we hope that they will continue to stay in Mexico, because we recognize Canadian investment not only as part of strengthening the manufacturing base in Mexico, but we also recognize that this investment is the one that sets the foundations for the North American factory that we have. And my last point would be that USMCA, or CUSMA, I should say, and CPTPP also, because we are partners also under CPTPP, we cannot forget about that, are important instruments that provide the framework for investment, trade, goods and services, the new digital economy to take place between our countries. And the rules that are there are commitments that we as countries have decided to abide by, and we have to comply with it. That is the nature of these agreements. They are agreements that were approved, at least in Mexico, they were approved by the Senate. They are the rule of the land, and we have to make sure that any policy decisions, any decisions made by Mexican authorities will observe what's in there. So that provides certainty. And when that doesn't happen, we always have the mechanisms to resolve disputes. We know that in any kind of relationship, conflicts can always arise, but the important thing is that we have ways to solve them. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Luz María. There's so much that you talked about that's rich vein for discussion, and I want to come back and see if we can touch on a number of them. But just one little piece, sort of the partner question to the one I just asked you was, what could be done more to promote Mexican investment in Canada? Actually, there is some, as you well know. Canada has always been open for business and would welcome that. What more could be done, do you think, to encourage the traffic going the other way as well?
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Ken. That's a very important question for us too. In fact, these last few days, we had a conversation with the Canadian Embassy here in Mexico, and the representative of Bimbo, which is one of the most important investors, Mexican investors in Canada, shared with us their success story, how they have been able to develop their presence in the Canadian market. I think that one of the reasons why it seems like, I don't know if people know about this, but for Mexico, Canada is our fourth largest trading partner. Canada is our third export market. And for Canada, Mexico is the third largest trading partner. So just to put these numbers in perspective, I mean, we are main trading partners among each other, but sometimes we seem to forget about this because we have a very important buffer between the two of us, which is the United States market. And we tend to think, when we think about USMCA, we tend to think about the US. When we think, I'm sure that Canada thinks the same way. When they think about CUSMA, they think about the US, and Mexico tends to dilute in this trade presence. So we need to make sure and to be aware that the three of us are partners. We have a very important one in the middle between the two of us, which is an important reason why we're together, because we want to produce together for the North American market, which includes the US market, of course. But I think that there's a lot of outreach that we need to make in order for people, and the business people, the business community, to learn about what it means to do business with one another, and also what it means, what are the benefits of looking into the Canadian market. In my opinion, the Canadian market is a very attractive market because it's a small one. So to the extent that it's smaller than the US, which is a huge, humongous market that sometimes we need to just think about a specific state or a specific sector or a specific region in a state, Canada is a market where I think that the size of the Mexican companies could fit perfectly well in that kind of market. So in my opinion, the first thing that we need to do is we need to do more outreach, and we need to tell people the success story of companies like Bimbo, for example. But I also know of a woman entrepreneur whose business has to do with, is it in the translation services. And she is a Mexican company, she owns a Mexican company. She's been in business for the last 20 years. And she recently opened an office in British Columbia. And this is, the reason is that she found that in Canada, she can also have a business opportunity to develop her business, not only in Canada, but also abroad. So why did this happen? Because she had the information. She was able to find about the market. So I think that it's very important that we do this outreach and we tell people that doing business in Canada from Mexico, or for Mexicans doing business, going and establishing in Canada, actually, it's a good business proposition, and it's a good way of growing their businesses.
Thank you, Luz Maria. We actually have a number of questions that are coming in that we will get to all of them, and they're a bit about as might not come as a surprise, about the investment environment generally and with specific industries in Mexico, and we will get to those. You mentioned about the partner country in between our two countries. And so, because it's a bit topical right now, let's maybe get to that now and then get to some of the other questions. President López Obrador had a recent trip to Washington, as you well know. I think the general feeling in Canada put Canada in a very awkward position, particularly during an election year and for other reasons which you would be aware of. What came out of the trip that President López Obrador had to the United States economically, and what do you think Mexico gained? And if you want to dare, maybe what it may have lost or not gained that it hoped to gain in its trip to Washington.
Thank you, Ken. The visit that President López Obrador paid to Mr. Trump in DC on July 8th responds to the interest that Mexico has, or the commitment that Mexico and the Mexican government has regarding CUSMA. So I think that it shows also that we are deeply committed to North American integration and to the new USMCA, which obviously also poses great opportunities, but it also poses challenges. We are also aware about that, no? The fact that we have accepted to include new areas of public policy that are central to an inclusive trade agenda. I think that brings challenges, but in the long term, I think it will define the nature of our integration. I also want to mention that President López Obrador also has had a few conversations with Prime Minister Trudeau. Actually, the last one, if I'm not wrong, took place on July 6th. They talked about the importance of the Canada-US-Mexico agreement for both countries, and they also highlighted the excellent bilateral relationship that we have with Canada. So I think that it's important that we keep this dialogue at the highest level of government, because it tells us that we are not only friends and partners, but that we have a project, that we have a common project. And we, in this case, Mexico was in the position to pay a visit, but we also understand that there are different considerations at different times. However, that doesn't mean anything except that when it's possible to meet, they will meet. So I think that the message that we wanted to send is Mexico's commitment to its integration in North America, which obviously is a great opportunity for us in Mexico. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Luz María. Yeah, no, your comments certainly echo the ones of the Foreign Minister Ebrard in a one-on-one conversatorio that we had live last year, back when you could do live events in Mexico City, about the desire to get closer to Canada, which is, as you would know from a Canadian perspective, is very important. It had been one of the cornerstones, really, of foreign policy of Prime Minister Trudeau, is to try and strengthen the relationship between Mexico and Canada. So it's always encouraging to hear those words. It's probably appropriate at this point to move to some of the questions, because they seem to be of a similar vein, the ones that we have so far. And it basically, we'll ask them specifically, but the overall concept is, what is the investment environment in Mexico now? And as you well know, and you've had to answer these questions a number of times, I'm sure, after the economic nationalism that President López Obrador has seemed to, the tack that he's taken, the cancellation of the airport contracts, the Constellation brouhaha in the north, the moves that he's made with respect to the electricity market. And I appreciate some of these are very maybe contentious issues that you can't get into in specifics, but they all point to an unease about investing in Mexico that, quite frankly, I haven't seen for a very, very long time, from not just stakeholders, but others who are sort of indirect stakeholders in the relationship between any country and Mexico, who want to be in Mexico, but are concerned about the moves that have been made so far, and not to even raise the issue of the increasing violence that has been going on, and that has more people worried, particularly what happened in the shootout in Las Lomas in Mexico City. So I know this is a broad question of many factors. The handling of COVID has worried some people as well. So you really, I've given you a great big fruit salad there of things to try and address, but they, as I say, these aren't comments or criticisms that I think one would want to take lightly, nor are they given in a vein of sort of a casual comment, that they come from a place of pretty deep concern. So could you talk about that in any order and however you'd like to?
Yeah.
I can't hear you. I don't know if it's my connection or not. I will drop off and try and join again. Oh, okay. Hello?
Am I there?
Oh, yes. Now, yeah, now I hear you. I didn't hear you before. Oh, okay,
Something happened with my internet, but I don't want you to think that I was avoiding the question, okay?
Oh, I thought it was my internet. I would never think that about you. That's fine. Please, maybe you should start from the beginning because I at least didn't hear any of the answers. So
Sure. I'm sorry, Ken. These are the challenges of doing home office. But thank
it's
you
not
for
the first time and it's not the last time for any of us. So don't worry about it, please.
I appreciate your understanding. Okay. Well, I was only saying that Mexico is a country that is open to investment. Mexico needs investment. We need private investment, domestic and foreign. And we acknowledge that the only way in which Mexico is going to be able to grow is through the productive investment that comes from the private sector. So there should be no question and no doubt about that. When we talk specifically about foreign investment, I want to mention that Mexico has a network of 13 free trade agreements. Most of them have an investment protection chapter with investor-state disputes settlement mechanisms, which provides protection for investors who may feel that their investments are being affected somehow. The second issue that I would like to mention and remind people is that we have also negotiated 31 bilateral investment treaties with 32 countries in the world. Many of them are in the European Union, where we have a free trade agreement, but the modernized one is not in place yet. Therefore, we're still operating with the agreement from the 2000. And it also, in addition to the free trade agreement, we have bilateral investment treaties with 16 countries in the European Union. So those are important elements, important instruments that have been used when investors have felt that their investments are being affected. In the specific case of CUSMA, we have a chapter on investment that provides for protection for investors. And whenever an investor feels that their investments have been affected in such a way that any measures contradict Mexico's commitments in CUSMA, then there is a way for solution. But I can tell you that we are the second largest destination for investment in Latin America, only after Brazil. We continue to be a site for investment. I also want to let you know, for example, that just, I think it was July 1st, if I'm not wrong, or just at the last few days, BRP, Bombardier, that has an operation in Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua, in the northern border with El Paso, Texas, they just announced a new investment in Mexico, and that will create around 1,000 jobs. Also, Safran, who is a French company in the aerospace sector, just announced a few days ago a new investment in Mexico and their joint production with Boeing in Mexico. So Mexico continues to be a place where production is taking place, where investment is taking place in the manufacturing sector, and where we know that companies see Mexico as a long-term proposition. And having CUSMA in place sends that message that we have a set of rules that we know that we have to abide by. Now, having said that, I also want to tell you that we do not ignore some of the key questions that investors have in Mexico, not only foreign investors, but domestic investors, and all of us who live here in Mexico. And those have to do with security, with corruption, and with issues that none of us want to see. These issues are top on the agenda of President López Obrador. He meets every day with his Security and Safety Council in Mexico to try to address these very important challenges that we obviously recognize as one of the areas in which we need to work. We need to work very hard to make sure that we can provide the best business environment. We acknowledge that these are challenges, And we also tell you that we are working on them from the Ministry of Economy, even though we do not have the capacity to play a role in the sense that we are not the ones that operate the policy. We follow very closely all of these issues, and we keep a very close conversation with the Cabinet of Security and with different levels of cabinet to make sure that we find the right solutions. Let me just offer you an example. There have been cases with respect to the way in which some railways operate sometimes, and recognizing that there is a problem there, we have participated with the Ministry of Safety in Mexico, and we have been able to offer solutions. So we are working. Sometimes those problems that are being solved are overshadowed by others, but we know that this is an issue on the agenda that is important for investors. It is important for us. We know that this is a situation that we need to address to make sure that our country comes back, especially in the context of the pandemic, comes back to the recovery and to the growth path. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Luz Maria. I appreciate everything you said, as you can appreciate as well. The treaties offer comfort. There's no question about it. But no investor wants to go into any country thinking that he or she is going to have to rely on that, right? It's not a good planning mechanism for an investment. And apropos of that, there's a question, and I'll go from someone. It says 40% of Canadian investment is in the mining sector, as you said earlier. President López Obrador has spoken out in very negative terms regarding foreign domination of the mining sector, and the mining undersecretary has stated that a large majority of Mexico's subsoil has been, quote, given to foreigners as mining concessions. The question is Mexico still a friendly destination for Canadian mining investment?
Yes, I am aware about those kinds of statements, and I think that it is important also to bear in mind that we obviously are open to Canadian investment in the mining sector. We think that Canada is a showcase of good practices, of best practices. We have participated in the Mexico Day in the mining sector in Canada. We very much value what Canadian companies have been able to contribute with in the Mexican mining sector. And I think that the current administration, President López Obrador, has said from the very beginning that we had to make an overhaul of the whole mining sector to make sure that everything is operating correctly, and also that the benefits of these operations also show in the communities, no? That the communities also benefit from the operations of different mines. I mean, all mines from all sorts of investors. So I think that this is a way only to making sure that we have an environment, a business environment that is inclusive, and where at this point, right now, the new administration, the President López Obrador administration, is not offering any new concessions. We are just working with the mines that are in place. And I know that Undersecretary Francisco Quiroga is working very closely with all of the mining sector, with each one of the mining companies. I know that they have a very good relationship, and they see Mexico as a business opportunity, a long-term business opportunity. So there may be some adjustments, yes, but that should not be interpreted as any way in terms of Mexico not being a country that welcomes foreign investment, but more importantly, that doesn't consider Canadian investment a very important one for all the contributions, not only in terms of technology and capital that they may bring, but also because we know that Canadian companies have very good practices. They're very good corporate citizens. So I think that this is part of an adjustment process in Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you, Luz Maria. And while I'm at it, and we can maybe close out this set of questions, and to the extent that you can comment, in addition to mining, which is the question indicated, and as you've certainly indicated very strongly in your opening comments, mining is important for Canadian investment, but also electricity, the electricity market. There's sort of a two-part question. One, there are Canadians who have invested, who now are looking at new regulations that's questioning the investments that they did make when the electricity market was opened, as it were, before new powers have been given to the CFE. And to the extent that you want to comment on that, or what kind of confidence, or how that ties into your comments about confidence that investors should have in Mexico, that the rules of the game won't be changed. And then a second one on a question that has come in is about Mexicans being open to alternative energy investments from Canada and generally from outside of Mexico. Oh, I think we lost.
Well,
I thought we lost you. Okay. Did you get the question? You heard the question?
No. Yes.
Oh, okay, great.
Yes. Okay. No, thank you, Ken, and thank you for your question. Look, I cannot go into much detail of what is happening in the electricity sector or the energy sector, because it goes completely beyond the scope of action, not only of Economia, but the responsibility that I have right now as Undersecretary of Foreign Trade. What I can tell you right now is that CUSMA provides for the possibility for each one of the parties to comply with different goals in terms of public policy. What we need to make sure is that this room for domestic policy and for domestic public policy is consistent with our commitments under CUSMA. And I can tell you that in the Secretariat of Economy and myself as responsible for foreign trade and for the implementation of the agreement, we are following very closely all of the actions that any actor in government takes in order to make sure and in order to make them aware that we have decided to be part of this agreement that was approved by the Senate, and that we need to make sure that we are consistent when we are revising our own public policy goals. So I can tell you that we are the safeguard in terms of CUSMA obligations. We know our commitments, and we are working with all of the different agencies in Mexico to make sure that they are aware about that, and whenever they define public policy, this issue is well taken into account. Thank you.
Thank you, Luz Maria. Okay, let's go to a new set of questions. Thank you for your candid responses to those. Much appreciated. This one comes from a reporter from Inside U.S. Trade. And just reading the question as it's written, El Economista today reported that USTR Lighthizer and Commerce Secretary Ross agreed to send to Mexico a list of companies with potential to relocate and invest in Mexico, according to Economy Secretary Graciela Marquez. The question is Undersecretary de la Mora able to elaborate on what this list is, why it is being sent, why it's important, and what can be expected? Do you know anything about this? This comes as a surprise to me. Is this something that you're aware of?
Same here. No, I am not aware about that list that may come along. But I think that I appreciate that question, because it allows me the opportunity of talking about an issue that I think it's on many people's mind, which has to do with relocation. Relocation is a great opportunity for North America, but it's also a great opportunity for Mexico. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic has set some very important challenges to the resiliency of many companies, sectors, global value chains, because unfortunately this pandemic showed the vulnerability of some global value chains, but it also forced us to close activities, shut down activities, to establish measures to restrict movement of people in order to be able to deal with this health emergency. On the other hand, we have also seen that there is this trade tension in the relationship between China and the US that has resulted in a tariff escalation that has affected, in fact, international trade, but also the way in which global value chains are operating. So in this respect, I think that relocating production to North America as a result of these decisions regarding nearshoring, decoupling of global value chains, and also making these value chains shorter puts Mexico in an ideal position to attract these investments. And the reason is that Mexico is an essential part of the manufacturing production in North America. Mexico brings a competitive edge to North American production. I can tell you that today, any company that considers investing in North America for the US market always consider Mexico in its strategic corporate decisions. So when we talk about relocation, we are thinking about how we can bring back or how we can invite companies that are established in different parts of the world, in different sectors, to produce in North America, to build a resilient value chain in a competitive environment. And this is where CUSMA plays a very important role, because CUSMA has the set of rules that will allow to produce without tariffs in an environment of regulations that is sort of coherent in North America, and that provides a whole set of rules that, I mean, I can talk about many, but that will definitely be a
We may have lost her again.
Okay.
Ay, no puede ser. Luz Maria?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay. We lost you for about 15 seconds.
Okay. Well, if I may continue, I'm sorry about this internet connection.
No. The one thing that's universal is the quality of internet companies. So everybody in the world can understand that, and the
exactly.
the fruitlessness of trying to complain about it or do something about it. So you're in good company.
Thank you for your patience with me, Ken. I was just saying, and I want to add this to my answer, is that we have to remember that also Mexico has a diverse and innovative industrial platform. This is something that NAFTA really did. NAFTA reshaped the face of manufacturing in Mexico. Mexico today ranks as the 19th most complex economy, and that I think says something about the quality of the production in Mexico, but also the capacity to attract investment in a diversity of sector and the possibility of developing new segments, production processes, companies. And I also want to tell you that more than 2/3 of our exports fall into high complexity sectors. So when we talk about relocation, we know that this is possible as a result of CUSMA, but also as a result of how Mexico has been able to grow along the ladder with the US, Mexico, and Canada, and how Mexico I
think we lost you again, Luz Maria.
Oops.
Luz Maria?
Yeah.
You're... Hi, okay, you're back. We lost you again for another 15 seconds.
I'm so sorry.
No.
I don't know if you were able to hear what I said with regard to that Mexico is the 18th most complex economy. So that makes us because we have the infrastructure to be able to attract more investments into Mexico. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, you raised the question of China and China investment and supply chains. I wanted to go into both of those areas, so perfect segue. We did an event a few weeks ago with Michael McAdoo, who's the co-head worldwide for trade for Boston Consulting Group, and also with Eric Miller of Rito Potomac in Washington, and with Jose Manuel Restrepo, the Commerce Secretary of Colombia, precisely on whether or not Latin America could take advantage of shifting supply chains, with the idea being that because of COVID and things that have been seen and other factors, that a number of companies are at least diversifying away or greatly enlarging its diversification and not solely basing itself on China. So the idea, of course, is that they're moving to Southeast Asia and Vietnam, for example. But the idea was, well, okay, could Latin America could capitalize on this? And what would it have to do to be able to capitalize on that? And so I sort of ask you, when you talked a little bit about this, because I know there has been some public criticism that Mexico could be in a very good situation to capitalize on this diversification, but it needs to be doing more, or it needs to really plan how it's going to capture this. And again, it's tied in a little bit with the investment climate, right? The issue that we talked about earlier. Do you want to talk a little bit about this strategy? I mean, how realistic is for Mexico, in your case, of course, to capture the attention of these companies that want to diversify this way?
Yes. Well, there are several reasons why Mexico is a good proposition for any investors that want to come to Mexico. And let me just offer you a couple of them. First of all, when companies consider where to establish, they can find in Mexico a network of free trade agreements. We have 13 free trade agreements with 50 countries in the world. That is a competitive edge, without a question, for Mexico. Why? Because for Mexico, they can produce for 1.3 billion consumers under preferential conditions. The second one has to do with the fact that we have a young, skilled labor force. Mexico's average age is 27 years old. Working age people, around half of working age people are in that cohort between 30 and 49 years old. A third point that I want to make is that of all graduates in Mexico, 17% come from engineering programs. And these are very high qualified engineering programs. We know that companies value tremendously the Mexican labor force. We also offer a solid infrastructure and logistics network. We have more than 170,000 kilometers of roads. We have 76 airports. We have close to 120 ports, and we also have railway tracks where we know that we're already integrated into the North American region. I also want to let you know that we have an amazing penetration of internet. We have this internet connectivity, even if mine is not working right now, and the broadband access supports the fourth industrial revolution, the Internet of Things, the digital economy. We rank third among the most mobile broadband subscription within OECD countries. And we have today 92 million mobile broadband subscribers. So these are only a few of the considerations that we can offer to companies that want to do business in Mexico. And one additional thing that I think it's important to bear in mind, when we think about shipping costs from Mexico to the US, we are talking about $9 per square meter compared to $140 per square meter from China. So there are real competitive edges and advantages of being in Mexico when addressing the US market, and also when companies are thinking about relocation. Not to say, for example, the time zones, which are also help, and being able to speak the same language. We have many people in Mexico that speak English. In the business community, basically everybody speaks English. So there are many reasons why to establish your business in Mexico, and I think that above all of this, the fact that we have CUSMA in place also helps to make the case, the business case.
Yeah, thanks, Luz Maria. Given all of that, I mean, there's no question that Latin America looks enviously at the proliferation of industrial development in Asia. Every developmental economist looks at it and tries to distill what has been learned from the success there. When you consider this and planning for how Mexico may take advantage of this quite a big opportunity, are there countries whose models you look to? Who are they, and are there a few specific factors you think that Mexico, Latin America writ large, but Mexico again in your case, could learn and needs to do better to be able to compete with the Asian countries that have done so well at this?
Well, when we look at companies, or I'm sorry, with other countries, what they have done, I can tell you that one of the examples that we follow is the Canadian example. And let me tell you why. And this is something that Secretary Marquez has just mentioned a few days ago. We think that what Canada has done in terms of integrating small and medium-sized companies into international trade is a very good model to look into. Likewise, Italy, with respect to the kind of supply chain that they have been able to develop and how they have been able to integrate regions into the success story of global markets. So I can tell you that we will be working very closely with Minister Mary G and her team, because we want to learn more about how Canada has been able to build this success story of integrating SMEs into the global markets.
That's very interesting. That's the first I've heard of that. I've heard it in other contexts, and people are complimented Canada on that. But coming from Mexico, I hadn't heard that. Let me. We only have a couple minutes left. Let me switch just for a second. And I appreciate that the decision lie not just within, if at all, in your ministry, maybe in foreign ministry, but as you well know, there's an election coming up to elect a new president of the Inter-American Development Bank. Mm-hmm. And clearly, you know, and given your high position economy, the direction of the bank, the priorities of the bank, the leadership of the bank is one component of that, is important for Mexico. Mexico takes the bank and the vehicle of the bank very seriously. Do you want to just talk a bit? Well, first of all, I guess the basic question, has Mexico pronounced the U.S. candidate, as have a couple other Latin American countries? Do you know, are you aware of a pronouncement as to whether or not it would support the U.S. candidate?
Well, Ken, I appreciate this question that you're posing right now. I know this is very important for the region. However, this is not a Ministry of Economy decision. This is a decision from the Ministry of Finance. Secretaría de Hacienda is the one that will make the final decision. So I am not in a position to comment because I don't have the information right now. Thank you.
No, fair enough. That's great. Well, we only have a couple of minutes left. I don't see any other questions. Well, maybe I will give the floor back to you, Luz Maria, to talk a little bit about any other concluding remarks you wanted to make. What you would consider to be success, for example, in Mexico, mm-hmm. over the course of this administration and your time in the position you have. Where would you like to see Mexico if you could wave your magic wand and everything you wanted were to happen? Within reason, of course. Within reason is that's the caveat, of course.
Yes, no, thank you, Ken. I appreciate it very much. Well, where would I like to see Mexico? I want to see Mexico back on the line of growth, of economic growth. We know that we're facing tremendous challenges today with respect to COVID-19 and all of what that means with respect to the recession that we're facing, the kinds of job losses that we're having, and the effect that it will have on all of us, our societies, each one of our citizens. So that really concerns me. That really worries me very much. And if there's anything that I can do to put our country, our region, all of us together back on track, to have a prosperous North America, to have a very dynamic growth rate, I am more than happy and ready to work on that. And I do believe that that kind of growth will come from the opportunities that COSMA brings, for the opportunities of having investments done wisely. And I also think that there is this area regarding the digital economy, the economy of the 21st century, the economy based on knowledge. I think that that's very important to keep in mind, that the three countries together can move ahead, and can create a new level of integration, in addition to the real economy, the manufacturing, the products that we have. I think that there is a lot of room to work together, to think about knowledge, a knowledge-based industry, a knowledge-based.
Yeah. Luz Maria, I think
countries can bring together.
Oh, if I could just, because I think I lost you for a minute, just to finish up. What is the latest thinking about the hit that the Mexican economy will take because of COVID? And what's the latest thinking about how long it will take to get out of it, or to get back to even just was before, for example? I mean, obviously we've heard the statistics that it'll set Latin America writ large back by 10 years in advancement it's made. Let's end it with that. So tell me, what's your latest thinking about the hit? How long it will take to climb out?
Yes. Well, in general, the forecast for this year, we may see a decline of GDP of between 8 and 10% probably. That obviously has a huge impact on SMEs and on jobs. But we are also, the way in which this government is addressing this issue is by helping the base of the pyramid, helping people who are the most, who could be the mostly affected, people who don't have a regular income, who don't have a social security. That's where the attention of government is being placed right now. The resources that are required are huge, are enormous, and that has put a lot of pressure on all of us. However, we believe that probably in a couple of years, 2-3 years, we will be back to where we were. This is something that I think it's not only for the Mexican economy, it's, as you mentioned, for all economies in the world. But I also want to underscore the fact that in Mexico, we have been very aware that the only way in which we're going to be able to overcome this situation is by collaborating, by cooperating, by having a very strong multilateral agenda, where we have been very active at the UN. We have been very active at WTO. We have been very active with the G20, with the Ottawa group in WTO, because we are convinced that only multilateralism, only international cooperation, and only by working together, we will be able to find the best policy solutions. So Mexico continues to be a very active actor in the international scene at all multilateral fora, because we understand that this is key for all of us to come out together. This is it. Either we all overcome this, or we will not be able to have a good result. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I promised that we were going to end on the hour, and I've kept to my promise. And this is, first of all, to thank you very much. Secondly, to remind the audience that the recording of this conversation today will be up on our website, probably by the end of today, if not the latest tomorrow, at ccacanada.com. We invite you, as I said earlier, to consult and look at the website for our future events, and also to listen to all the recordings of the many events that we've done over the last several months. So with that, Luz Maria, I'd like to thank you once again, and it's been a genuine pleasure. Have a good afternoon.
Same here, Ken.
Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.